Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving right into an incredible story about extreme environments, sheer human ambition, and ultimately, nature's triumph. We're going to look at the fascinating intersection between a legendary explorer's lifelong achievements and some very surprising modern-day residents of the freezing north. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. Nature reclaims the Arctic.
To really understand the historical past of the Arctic, we actually need to start right here in the present day. I want you to imagine the desolate, freezing outposts of the far north. They've been empty for a long time, completely abandoned by the researchers who built them. We're talking about places battered by absolute extreme weather, totally isolated from civilization. So, who do you think has moved in?
Well, the answer is wild polar bears. According to a September 2025 AP News update, some absolutely striking photos captured by photographer Vadim Makarov went viral. And they show these massive creatures literally looking out the windows of an abandoned Russian research station on Wrangel Island over in Chukotka in Russia's Far East. They're just casually wandering around the derelict buildings. It's such an incredible visual of nature moving right back into human spaces.
Section 2. The boy who would explore.
But that brings up a really good question. How did these human outposts get built in such hostile environments in the first place? To answer that, we have to travel back to the golden age of Soviet Arctic exploration and meet an absolute legend. Someone whose 115th birthday was recently celebrated by the Russian Meteorological Service. His name was Georgy Alexeyevich Ushakov. Born on January 30th, 1901, into a poor Amur Cossack family, which was this fiercely resilient, frontier-dwelling community, his beginnings were incredibly humble. To give you a sense of just how humble, his father was actually the only literate person in their entire village.
Ushakov's early life was, well, it was incredibly harsh. He moved to Khabrovsk at age 11, lived in a flophouse, and worked all sorts of odd jobs. He was a newspaper boy, a customs copyist, and even an apprentice to a barber and a jeweler. But his raw talent and serious work ethic eventually caught the eye of the famous Far East explorer V.K. Arsenyev back in 1916. And that chance meeting, it completely changed his destiny, pulling him right out of a life of poverty and thrusting him into the world of scientific discovery.
Section 3. Mapping the Unknown North.
So let's jump forward to his prime years and see exactly how this grassroots survivor became a true master of the ice. Even though his university studies in Vladivostok were interrupted by the Civil War and military service, he managed to become this brilliant, self-educated, encyclopedic geographer. In 1926, he led an expedition and actually founded the very first settlement on Wrangel Island, meticulously mapping the territory while he was at it. By 1930, he was appointed deputy director of the All-Union Arctic Institute, and then came his absolute greatest feat. From 1930 to 1932, he co-mapped the massive Severnaya Zemlya archipelago. For these monumental, totally game-changing achievements, he was awarded the highest Soviet honor of the time in 1933, the Order of Lenin.
4. That is the astounding number of brave individuals, directed by Ushakov, that it took to completely describe and map that massive Severnaya Zemlya archipelago over 2 grueling years. Think about that for a second. The global geographical community widely recognizes this as one of the most outstanding and heroic mapping expeditions of the entire 20th century. Just 4 people, braving all of the Arctic elements. Absolutely wild.
Moving on to Section 4. Heroic rescues and records. You see, Ushakov wasn't just a map maker. He was a real leader when lives were on the line in literally the most dangerous terrain on Earth. In 1934, disaster struck when the steamship Chelyuskin was crushed by ice. Acting as a government representative, Ushakov was one of the very first to arrive at the Schmidt ice camp. He was there to personally oversee the massive, heroic rescue of the stranded sailors, directing the entire evacuation right there from the frozen sea. In the very next year, he led the first high-latitude sea expedition on the icebreaker Sadko. Now, this expedition didn't just break global sailing records by reaching 82 degrees and 4 minutes north, it also made some really critical scientific discoveries. For instance, they established the penetration of warm Gulf Stream waters into the polar basin, which was a massive climatic revelation at the time. They also discovered a brand new island, aptly named Ushakov Island, and, crucially, they defined the borders of the continental shelf. Our sources note that this specific achievement is actually still vital to Russian interests in the Arctic today.
Section 5. A legacy set in ice.
Let's bring this all full circle to really understand the permanent mark Ushakov left on the globe. He built this unbelievable resume of geographical immortality. I mean, his name is literally etched into the most extreme corners of our planet. Going from a penniless boy in a flophouse, he grew up to have an island in the Kara Sea, a cape and a settlement on Wrangel Island, a glacier, river, and cape on Severnia Zemlya, and get this, even a mountain in Antarctica named after him.
And his dedication? It was truly lifelong. Upon his death in Moscow in December of 1963, Ushakov made sure his final resting place permanently tied him to the freezing, unyielding environment he spent his entire life trying to conquer. By his own will, he was buried on Domashny Island, right there in the Severnia Zemlya archipelago that he and his 3 companions had mapped decades prior. So when we pull all of this together and we put the incredible, life-risking ambition of the 1930s side by side with those 2025 photos from Kolyachin Island, we see a pretty haunting contrast. On one hand, you have humans building settlements and mapping unknown Arctic shelves against seemingly impossible odds. But on the other hand, you have the reality of today, human endeavor slowly giving way to nature's inevitable reclamation. We've got abandoned research stations that are now entirely overtaken by wild polar bears just looking out the windows. So the big takeaway I want to leave you with today is this. Considering the sheer willpower it took for pioneers like Ushakov to establish these footholds, and yet how quickly the apex predators moved right back into our old research stations, how permanent is our modern footprint really going to be? Will everything we build in these extreme environments eventually just become another shelter for the wild? It's definitely a fascinating thought to chew on. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope you learned something entirely new today.